You ever wake up thinking you've got a peaceful morning ahead? Birds chirping, coffee steaming, water so smooth you could swear time just stopped. And then you hear a shriek that could make a bald eagle drop out of the sky. Get that disgusting eyesore off my waterfront. That was Karen Whitfield, charging down my dock like she was storming Normandy, waving her phone on my old fishing boat as if it were radioactive. Behind her, two HOA board members, Thomas and Rebecca, shuffled around, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else but stuck in this circus act. And before I could even take a sip of coffee, Karen snapping pictures and ranting, "This ugly piece of junk is ruining our entire community." Can you imagine the nerve? Standing right on my dock, the same dock I'd maintained for 2 decades, screaming at me to move my own boat just because she didn't like how it looked. The audacity, I swear, sometimes it feels like living in a sitcom, only the laugh track's been replaced by HOA threats. 20 years. That's how long I called this patch of lake mine, sweating through summers to repair the dock, paying every last dime in taxes, keeping up with the weeds, replacing planks, staining boards, doing it all myself. And here's Karen, clipboard clenched in a white-knuckle grip, blazer iron sharp enough to cut glass, looking at me like I'm a village vandal. Thomas and Rebecca just kept inching back, probably hoping she'd forget they ever agreed to tag along. Do you have any idea what this does to property values? Karen wails, as if my 2009 Boston Whaler is a crime against humanity. I'll give her this. The boat's not pristine. The paint's faded from years in the sun, sure, and there's some dings here and there, but it's got stories etched into every scratch. Stories about teaching my kid to fish, lazy afternoons with my old man, quiet moments you just can't buy at any price. She called it floating garbage. I call it home. I set my coffee down, careful not to spill a drop, and watch Karen's cheeks go red with righteous fury, her eyes flashing with that special kind of HOA outrage that thinks personal taste should be the law of the land. "Mrs. Whitfield," I said as calm as I could manage, "this is private property. The dock was built in '99, long before the HOA ever existed." Kept my voice steady, polite, even like I was explaining bedtime rules to a cranky toddler. But she was having none of it. "I don't care when it was built. It's visible from the common areas, so it falls under our guidelines." She glances at her clipboard, reading off a list of complaints that sounded like they'd been scrawled on the drive over deteriorating marine vessel, eyesore classification, immediate removal required. You'd think she was shutting down a nuclear reactor, not griping about a fishing boat. Thomas tried to interrupt, probably to talk about the actual rules, but Karen silenced him with a glare that could stop a charging bull. Rebecca gave up on filming and just stared at the water, wishing, I bet, she'd picked a different hobby. I just nodded and asked, real slow, "And these guidelines, where are they written down? What's the standard for an eyesore around here?" She didn't even blink. "We know it when we see it. Any reasonable person can tell the difference." That was her whole case, subjective taste, dressed up as law. I filed that little gem away for later. So I kept playing nice, asking what kind of timeline she expected. 14 days, she said, shoving a notice into my hand with all the ceremony of a court summons. Remove it or bring it up to community standards, though she was quick to add, cosmetic improvements won't be enough. She wanted it gone, period. And just before she left, she tossed in the kicker, "Don't think about causing trouble. The HOA has full legal authority here. We've dealt with resistant homeowners before." She tried to sound tough, but the more she talked, the more obvious it was this was about power, not community. When they finally left, I just sat there on my dock, the lake glassy and still, coffee gone cold. This place wasn't just a piece of land to me. My father built that dock, taught me to fish on these waters. He also taught me bullies only win when folks let him. So I started documenting. Every word, every threat, every witness, typed it up, snapped photos, filed everything away. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to get an education. As I thought it through, it hit me. Karen never even checked if she had jurisdiction. Everything she'd said was her opinion, not the law. And she assumed I was just going to roll over. Yeah, that happened, but not this time. Sometimes you gotta let a bully think they've won, just so you can see how many holes are in their game. 3 days later, a certified letter landed in my mailbox, Official HOA stationery, red ink stamped across the front like a foreclosure notice. 3 pages of legal mumbo-jumbo that, when you stripped away the fancy words, boiled down to do what Karen says or else. Not a single actual regulation cited. Just more intimidation dressed up in bureaucracy. So I took that letter and headed over to see Lena Coleman. She opened the door, flour-dusted hands and all, worry written all over her face. "Kevin, they can't really make you move your boat, can they?" I handed her the notice. She laughed. One of those laughs that says, "Are you kidding me? Your boat's not the problem, Kevin. Karen's the problem. Last month she threatened to fine me because my mailbox post was 6 inches too tall." Lena's voice got sharper, her patience clearly worn thin. Half the people here are sick of her, but everyone's afraid to be next. James Thompson was next on my route. He stepped out of his garage, sawdust in his beard, eyes wary. "Heard you got the formal treatment," he said, wiping his hands. I asked him if my boat really hurt property values. He hesitated, glanced around, then muttered, "Karen's lost her mind. She's threatening to sue Mrs. Patterson over a garden gnome. This place is starting to feel like a police state." His words stuck with me. Folks wanted to speak up, but fear had everyone frozen. That night, I called Karen, pretending to be the beaten-down homeowner she expected. "Mrs. Whitfield, I really want to cooperate, but can we maybe extend the timeline while I figure something out?" She ate it up, thought she had me right where she wanted. 14 days is more than generous. And again, I asked, "What's the actual guideline?" She just repeated, "Reasonable people know what's right." That was her whole argument. After the call, I spent hours digging through every page of the Oakage Covenants. 47 pages of rules about mailbox styles and flower beds. Nothing about boats, nothing about aesthetics beyond community harmony. Karen's power? It was all smoke and mirrors. So I organized every file, every neighbor's story, every photo, and set out to do what Karen never expected: fight her with her own rules. At the county recorder's office, I tracked down my dock permit, March 15th, 1999, predating the HOA by 4 years. Found boundary maps showing my dock outside their jurisdiction. The HOA had been working off old maps for years, just assuming they could boss folks around. I started talking to other neighbors. Linda Williams, fined for sunflowers that were too bright. Robert Wilson, told his Navy garage door clashed with some imaginary pallet. Dorothy Patterson, a widow in her late 70s, threatened with lawsuits over ceramic gnomes she'd kept for decades. The more people I talked to, the clearer it became. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was enforcing her will, picking on folks least able to fight back. I called Karen again, this time asking her to send the actual regulations about waterfront aesthetics. She bristled, said, "We evaluate each case individually. Reasonable people know what looks right." That was all she had. A week later, the circus rolled back into town. Karen, a tow truck the size of a house, 2 more board members, Rebecca live streaming, and Joe Stevens, the tow truck driver, looking like he'd seen this movie before. Karen announced, "Your deadline's up. We're taking the boat." I asked Joe what kind of paperwork he needed. "Usually a court order or police backup, ma'am. HOA paperwork's not enough." Karen sputtered, insisting her resolution was all the authority needed. Joe refused. "Call the cops if you want, but I'm not touching private property." Neighbors started drifting over. Lena with her coffee, James pretending to check his mailbox, Dorothy with her walker. Karen, still thinking this was her big moment, shouted for all to hear, "We have absolute authority to remove anything we find inappropriate." You could feel the mood shift. Dorothy piped up, "Seems a bit much for a boat, dear." Joe flat out refused to touch it, telling Karen to get law enforcement involved if she really wanted to go there. Karen doubled down, saying the HOA could remove anything, anywhere, if it didn't fit her standards. I made sure she said it loud enough for every camera in the crowd. Joe and the convoy packed up and left, leaving Karen standing there with nothing but her clipboard and wounded pride. The next morning, a county code inspector knocked on my door. Seems the tow truck fiasco had triggered enough complaints to finally get the county's attention. 1 week later, the whole neighborhood gathered for a public review. Karen showed up with a hotshot attorney, tried to put on a show. But under pressure, she admitted, on the record, that the HOA used reasonable but unwritten standards that they could act on whatever they didn't like. I presented my stack of evidence: permits, maps, neighbor statements, audio of Karen's own words. The crowd backed me up, telling their stories about sunflower fines, known threats, mailbox drama. Even Rebecca, live streaming the whole thing, said maybe the board had gone too far. Inspector Williams delivered the verdict. The HOA had no authority over my dock. Karen's enforcement tactics were arbitrary, and the county ordered the board to write actual rules, stop harassing residents, and submit to outside oversight. Best of all, I got to post a sign: private property, access restricted by county order. Anyone could fish from my dock, except the people who'd try to take it away. And they tried. Karen came first, insisting she still had rights. Thomas tried to smooth things over. Michael brought his grandkids, hoping cuteness would do the trick. Every time, I told him the same thing: come back when you treat neighbors with respect. Until then, the dock stays closed to you. Word got out. By Labor Day, the dock was the busiest place in town. 50 fishing permits issued, neighbors finally talking and laughing without fear of Karen's clipboard. The community newsletter even ran a story about how the dock had enhanced community life and property values went up. Real estate agents started touting the fishing culture Karen once called an eyesore. And Karen? She faded into the background. One day, she showed up and for the first time just asked what would it take to come back. I told her, just respect the standards we set together. Don't use authority to bully, treat people like people, and leave the aesthetics policing at home. She nodded, and, believe it or not, that's how the whole mess finally started to heal. Funny, isn't it? In the end, ugly and beautiful weren't about boats or lawns or mailboxes. They were about how we treat each other. That's the real standard this community finally learned to live by. And you know what? I'd love to hear what you think. Ever had a run-in with an overreaching HOA? What does community mean where you live? Drop a comment, share your story, and let's keep the conversation going. Because sometimes the only way to beat a bully is with patience, logic, and a little bit of neighborly love.